We're now going to begin a different section of the mission itself, namely some of the rooms inside the mission, both on the lower floors and on the upper floors. As I approach this door, this is the door that opens into the priest's kitchen and the dining room. This door was the only access to the dining room and to the kitchen before 1968. Well, we are now in the priest's kitchen. What you are looking at is a kitchen that dates to 1974, which was a part of the reconstruction work here at the mission done by M.T. Patrick Company under the guidance of Monsignor Hawks and Father Roger Anderson. The kitchen that existed here before was a very primitive type kitchen. The ceilings alone, these are drop ceilings with fluorescent lightings in them. Before this ceiling was put in here, the original beams, the big beams that are roughly 12 by 16, formed part of the roof together with the planking. The kitchen was very crude. There was a simple gas stove which stood here against this wall, and there was also a sink that we see. The counter is all new, of Spanish tile. As when I walk over here to where there are some chairs where the priests are able to eat at least breakfast and their own lunch. This area did not exist before because in this corner here were the washer and dryer. So it was quite interesting in here sometime if the washing was being done and it was also lunch or dinner time, one had to overcome the sound of the going washer and the dryers. This was a very primitive kitchen, as I said before, and it was a very difficult type of room for the brothers that served the padres here to prepare meals properly and also to allow the priests to entertain occasionally. When we leave this room, we're going to turn around and walk in this direction, and we will come into what is now the priest's dining room itself, which is an improvement on the early dining room. We are now in the priest's dining room. This room, much like the kitchen, was of a very rustic nature. The ceiling was not of the type that you see here now with the beams. It was much more open and rustic. There was a simple table in here with about 4 chairs. There were no closets for glassware or dishes or anything of that particular nature. It was quite stark, and I suppose at that time much fit into the lifestyle of the Capuchin order. As we look in this direction here, going past the kitchen door, we are going to see an addition that was made here in the time of Father Kelly, which saved a lot of walking in order to come to the kitchen and the dining room, both for the priests when they were eating and also for the brothers when they were preparing meals. As I said before, the only way to get to the kitchen from the other parts of the building was to walk along a corridor outside, come in the kitchen door, and here was the kitchen and here was the dining room. So that it was a long way, number one, from the priest's quarters to this area. It was also a very uncomfortable way in the cold weather, in the inclement weather. However, in approximately 1965, through the generosity of a man named Galvin, who owned the San Fernando Rey Ranch, an Australian who was extremely rich, his generosity allowed a stairway to be brought down here from the 2nd floor to the 1st floor. I am now standing at the base of the stairway, which will lead us to the 2nd floor. We will be going up there in just a few moments. But you can see that this stairway, which was within the building, made easy access to the kitchen compared to the way it was in the earlier days. So somewhere in that period of 1965, through the generosity of Mr. Galvin, as I said, this stairway plus other furnishings in the upstairs living quarters of the priests were able to be improved and made more comfortable. As I approach the 2nd floor here in the mission, this can also be called the entrance to the cloister, which would have been part of the ancient or early lifestyle of the Capuchins and Franciscan priests, in which the area where the priests lived was a closed area and open only to those who were assigned here. Now it is more open. The rule of cloister does not seem to be a much effect anymore. But these stairs are the entrance to the second floor of the cloister, which we now just refer to as part of the convento. It is the area where the priests reside. They have a room and also a small office. As we down along the corridor of the priest's cloister or convento, we were going to pass the various rooms. This room here is a double suite of rooms, which was originally a common room or a recreation room for the priests. However, when other priests were assigned here to aid the pastor, this room was no longer used as a family room. And as we will see later, a new family room was made in the mission. However, this is one of the rooms, and as we walk down the hall, there are a number of other rooms along this corridor until we come to the open door at the end of the building. And at that particular point, we have the addition to the old mission, which included the hall and the conference room, the addition of the arches to the outside of the mission. We'll now go down to that area, and I'll be able to point out some things that I believe are of some importance. Before we arrive at the far end of the living quarters of the priests, you'll find a large mission door opening, rounded opening through, which is what we refer to as the center bearing wall of the mission structure itself. As we enter in here, we are going to briefly turn to our right, and at that time, we will be able to see what is now the priest's recreation room. So before we entered that room, as the mission developed, and in the 1990s, early 90s, and late 80s, it was found necessary to start organizing and having a proper place to store many of the mission artifacts. Without going into detail, I'm just going to open this door, and it will give us a brief view of a room that we have established and has a future use to be the storage of some of the artwork that we are not able to display. So I'll open the door now, and we can take a brief look into this area. As you can see, we have stored some of the original candlesticks in here. We have, although they are not able to be seen now, we have a number of photographs, rather oil paintings, etc., that have been stored for preservation at the present time, and later on will be a proper place will be found for them for display in the mission itself. And now, as we come in past this storage area, we're going to go in this direction, and we will get a view of the priest's recreation room. We're now looking at the priest's recreation room. This room originally was not constructed. It is actually within the ruins of the old mission. Underneath are the original beams and floor planking. Beyond this dry wall, there is a short passage which preserves the center adobe wall, which is the bearing wall of the mission. And this room was developed primarily because as we approached the 90s, we found it necessary to begin some archival work here at the mission. And so under the direction of Father Jim Clary, he requested that I convert this room from its native appearance of rough attic into a room that could be used for our archives. Okay, however, in the late 1980s, it was found necessary to create an archive here at the mission because the accumulation and preservation of many of the historic records and artwork that we had at here in the mission, which were not able to be or properly stored in the museum, especially archival material, which are documents which date back to the very early days in the mission, and documents which date up actually until yesterday. This room was used for about 2 years as a archival center, and at that particular time, it was when it was decided to create the first room, which was the family room or recreation room for the priests, to convert that into living quarters for one of the associates here at the mission. It was determined that the only room available for a recreational room for the priests was to use the Archival Center. And the idea would be that having just relocated the archival material temporarily, this would be made into a family room for the priests, and a new archive room would be established at another point in the upstairs area of the mission, and we will see that area a little bit later. For the present time now, we're going to continue our walk down the convento, the interior convento, and take a look at the addition to the mission, which took place in 1988 and 89. This is the second stairway at the mission. This is the stairway that was used before the other stairway was put in that we referred to a little while ago. So the priests coming from the living quarters found it necessary to go down this staircase, go out into the convento, walk to the end of the building, and enter the priest's kitchen and dining room. And in 1965, that problem was eliminated, and another stairway was established, as we said, under the patronship of Mr. Galvin from the San Fernando Rey Ranch along the road to Cachuma. At the present time, we're standing at the end of the convento as it existed up until 1989. The building ended here with a solid brick wall across this area and into this area here, and that was the end of the mission buildings as they stood before 1988. As we move down further down the corridor, we will take a look of a room that was added at that time, which was a bedroom and office to be used by one of the associates. It was actually turned out to be the permanent room for Father Cyril Kelleher when he was here at the mission after he had retired, and he was running or directing the Capuchin missionary work in Mexico. As part of the new building construction, there was a furnace room was created in order to supply the heating and air conditioning for the new sections of the building. So the various conference rooms, the parish hall, etc., and some of the offices down below are heated and cooled by the furnaces in this area. Directly across from the door into the furnace room is a stairway which leads us to the ground floor and to the outside area under the arches of the mission. This stairway was put in as accessibility to the upstairs floor. When the building permit were created, it was given a choice to the mission that if we were going to use for public functions the upstairs section, that would be required to put in an elevator. It was decided, and the permit was not, or okay for that elevator was not given by the Archdiocese, and as a result, these stairways were put in without an entrance to them from the outside, number one, and number two, under the conditions that they would be used only for access to the upper floors, but not for public use. However, after about 3 years after the mission was finished, probably around 1990, Dwayne Mirabali, one of the men's club members, came in, and we did open up the area so that there was a direct access to the outside without going through the parish hall. At the present time, as with all permits, we do not follow the regulations or the conditions of approval for the mission, and the room up here upstairs, which you will look at in just a few moments, is used for public meetings. As we turn to the right, we are now going to enter through this closed door the what we refer to as the upper conference room. At this time, there's a meeting going on in there, but we will be able to photograph the meeting, and we will talk about it at a later time. To one particular thing in this room. This room eventually was thought to be, when it was added to the original building, we thought perhaps that this could become the priest recreation room. That was not feasible because of the noise, etc., coming from the parish hall. However, when the building was being constructed and looking forward to that, we decided that as the sewer line ran through beneath on the floor, if you will take a look at the stool where it is placed now, if that floor was removed right at that particular point, one would find a sewer connection and a hot and cold water connection. The idea was at that time perhaps a number of things could happen, namely a restroom could be installed in this part of the building, in this room. Also a wet bar could also be established, but both required running water and a sewer connection. And so they are there for future use and can be and could be used for a number of other things besides what they were planned for in the beginning. We're now going to leave this room, return down through the corridors of the mission of the Padres headquarters, and we will enter the archival section of the mission. This second floor that we have been touring in the last few moments should be noted that this was the result of the 1947 restoration, which took place primarily under the pastorate of Father Cyprian O'Leary, and was paid for by the Hearst Foundation. Before this particular time, the priests were forced to live in various rooms on the first floor, and which were not actually very comfortable. However, after the reconstruction of the second floor, they were able to provide proper living quarters for the priests that were stationed here at the mission. So the area that we have been looking for in the last few moments here on the second floor is all part of the 1947 restoration under the sponsorship of the Hearst Foundation. We have returned now to the entrance to the priest's recreation room, and as we pass through from the hallway, you will notice that we will go through this quite large opening in the which allows us to get into the area which we are looking at the present time. It is worthy to note that the thickness of this wall is a plaster over the original bearing wall of the 1804 mission, the adobe wall. And as you look to the right, we will get a better picture of that adobe wall. In this area here, together with the original plaster, limestone plaster that was placed over the adobe. Up until about 10 years ago, this part of the wall was also exposed, but because of the area being heavy traffic and the constant dropping of dust and dirt into the walkway, it was found necessary to put a very light coat of plaster over the original adobe and over what was left of the original limestone plaster from the mission. When we leave this room, we're going to go in this direction here, and we will enter into the attic area of the mission. And perhaps, even though it is now storage, we will be able to see some of the historic parts of the upper floor of the mission. And certainly later, as we pass through the archives, we will get a much better idea of the construction of the original mission by the Chumash. We are now in the attic area, having left the recreation room, which is the priest's headquarters, as it were. This has primarily is used, as very obvious, is for storage. But however, behind the storage area, we will see and find some of the original building which exists. The primary thing that remains from the original mission is the bearing wall here at the mission. Even though after the earthquake of 1812, this second story was not replaced by the Padres, the bearing wall and at its full height of the mission was retained. And at a later date, the second floor was created. Originally, using the center wall as a bearing wall, the beams for the ceiling went down directly over the arches and created the effect of a single-story building. As we look at the back wall, which may be very difficult to see because of the darkness of this area, you do have the center bearing wall, which is about 4 to 5 feet thick. It's an adobe wall, and it is plastered with limestone plaster. And that wall is pretty much intact. One thing to note, that in this second floor area, even though the rooms at this present time are very large, there were a series of about 3 rooms in each area. As a result, I'll try to point out the size of the various rooms. To the left here would have been the one room on the second floor of the original mission. Going down to an area about, at this point here, there would have been a wall, another wall, which would have made a room here and now created a new room in this area. And going over to this area here, we're going to see a small doorway. And that also created a third room for living quarters and whatever the Padres chose to use the second floor for. However, this area of the mission received very little use, being that the mission buildings were not, the second stories and all, were probably not concluded till about 1810 or so. And as a result, very little use could have been made of this second floor because the earthquake hit in 1812 and destroyed most all the structure that was on the second floor, except the bearing wall and very small portions of the side walls which protruded from the bearing wall. As we turn to the left and move towards the outside of the building, we're going to see the reconstruction of the second floor of the mission, which was done in 1947, again under the pastorate of Father Isidore, Father Cyprian. And we'll also notice that there was an attempt to create the same thickness of the original mission walls. So although it is very difficult, you will see that there are actually 2 framings for the building, a framing on the inside of the building, a vacant space, and then the outside framing. And that created the thickness of the wall effect from the outside, although that is not obvious from the inside. The important thing about this second story reconstruction in 1947 is the fact that having removed the roof from the first story, there was needed a very strong support for the center bearing wall, which was freestanding, and consequently the use of the large beams, the double 2x4ing in the construction to the outside added a full support and probably protects the second floor against any serious earthquakes, although there is always a chance that we would have an earthquake of major proportions, and much more than this area could be destroyed at that time. As I move down this direction here, you will notice that there is a door And this door exits out onto the deck. We have been out there before, above the arches, and it just as a way of making accessible. But the door, the rooms that you see here, both on my left and my right, were established here in the late 1980s with the purpose of having some area to again store some of the valuable things that we have here at the mission. This room was later from storing mission artwork and stuff, was converted into an area where the financial records of the gift shop and the mission are kept, so that there is access to them at any time. As just a note, as we stand here, we are doing this filming during another major restoration of the mission in 2006, and as you will have noticed, and we talked about it when we did the mission church, the frameworks on the Stations of the Cross were new, much more in keeping with the artwork of the mission. The frames that I'm standing by here now, in this particular frame, were the frames that were used to frame the Stations of the Cross. They were most likely constructed in the early 1950s when Paul Killian did some of the restoration of the artwork in the church and created the Madonna Chapel. He also had these frames made, and they covered the stations because the early stations had no frames on them and were readily exposed to the elements, to peeling and stripping. So these frames do not have any historical value, and it hasn't been determined how we're going to deal with them in the near future. We're now going to move down past these two doors, and we're going to enter what is now the archives. And this is the room that was established after the family room was made for the priests. So the archives were moved from that room, and we built this new room, and it now is the present archive of Mission Santa Inés. As we move towards the archive room, we're going to, and looking towards the bearing wall or the center wall of the mission, we're going to pass what was an original doorway into the other side, which would be the west wing of the building. At present time, because this is being used for storage, that doorway is pretty much obscured. However, it was a doorway that entered into the other side of the building, much like the doorway that we passed through when we came into this area. You can also notice that many of the doorways are very low openings, and that is primarily because there was no need to have a large opening because the padres were small and the Chumash were small. Secondly, the smaller the opening for a window or for a door, the more structurally sound the building was. We are now in the archive room. It is much in the period of formation at the present time, but it is quite a contrast to the old mission because as time goes along, and even at the present time, we can see very many items of high tech which were used to preserve the records and the various historical elements of the mission. We hope in time to have all the documents computerized and collected in a safe place, and also the original records stored in fireproof containers. This is all the work of Sheila Benedict, who is the archivist here, but she has a crew which are coming in at least once a week to work here in the archives. Eventually, we hope to have this archive room used on a regular basis, and it will be an area from which much of the research of this mission can take place from a historical point of view. As you look over here to in this area here, this is going to makes part of our library here at the mission, although we do not have a whole number of very historical books, that it is a library that can be used for reference. The historical books of the mission have been stored in museum-proof boxes identified so that they will be kept in a state of non-deterioration. Those books have been put away and in a safe place, and they are not available except for very special reasons. But we do have copies of the material in those books, and they can be used for historical reference at a later date. When this room was created, the idea would be that in this area you would have the archives and the research material, but there would also be a room attached to it that would be used when students came here to do research work. It is always a very dangerous thing to leave an archive open to the public. So as a result, we hoped to create a small room which would be a place where the students could come, they could check out a single material, use it for their research, and it would be within our control, and no one would have free access to the mission. We established that, and although it never was able to be used, and we'll take a look at it in a couple of minutes, it was destined to have another use, although it will be available in the future should we reach a point where we have to have, or students will be coming to do research. Here we have a microfilm reader. On the various desks we have copiers and computers and scanners. This area that you're looking at right now is my desk, which I keep some of the museum records and the track of the artwork that's being restored here at the mission. This statue has been brought up here in the last couple of months, and it is a statue. Everybody has wondered who this statue depicted. It hung on the center platform in one of the pilasters in the church. We did not have any records of who this particular statue represented. However, when I was in Montreal last year, I was looking at the cathedral in Montreal, and around the dome of the sanctuary, there are various depictions of the various saints in the church and the apostles. And there, to my surprise, was an exact duplicate in a statue form, but much larger, of this particular statue. And underneath it, it says Sanctus Paulus, which means Holy Saint Paul. So at least right now, we know that this statue represents Saint Paul, the apostle, and fortunately, we were able to identify it. Presently, it is being kept here because it is the next piece of work to be restored. It is a perfect example of the decay that can take over the years in the various artwork and statuary work here at the mission. And I'm going to move a little bit of this, and perhaps we can focus in on some of the work, the deterioration that is taking place here on this particular statue. The upper area is not in too bad of shape, although the hands have been repaired at different times rather crudely. The colors are very faded, and it looks like an attempt has been made to restore it at one time, but unsuccessfully. In the head, we can see that there are small holes. It is hard to tell whether they are bores that have gotten in there, or my thought would be that originally over this head there was a halo, and it was mounted through that one hole. Quite frequently here at the mission, the statues that have crowns on them are mounted in that way with a small hole that has been put into to the head. The significance of the, as it were, the lapel button here on St. Paul is difficult to understand, but perhaps it can be explained mostly by the sailing ship that is located here, which would represent the travels of St. Paul from Israel all the way to Rome, where he was put to death. The setting sun here would also refer to the fact that St. Paul moved towards the modern civilization of his time, from the Hebrew to the Roman, from the Greek to the Roman Empire, and that also represents his evangelization. We are not able to, at least I am not able to explain the presence of the tree, which is located in this quadrant button. The main part of the deterioration that is taking place in this statue is in the base, and it's going to be a very difficult thing to restore. The man that does our restoration work is coming on December 10th to bring back Our Lady of the Rosary, and at that time we're going to take a look at this and see what we can do to restore the picture. But we do know that it is a polychrome wood carving in the usual form of the mission period. We do see that in the base are the reflections of many of the mission colors that were used in the sanctuary, on the walls, etc. We have the light colors, we have the dark greens and the gold, and so it very well fits into the theme. Perhaps this statue actually was placed at one time in the a niche in the sanctuary, but we have no evidence for that. It's just to summarize that perhaps that is the place where it was located. However, it is a original piece of statuary. Unfortunately, it is one of the very few items that Kurt Beyer did not record in his book about the mission and the artwork here at the mission. I don't know why it was not covered. Perhaps this statue was not available to him at that time. So we still have to do a lot of historical research to determine more about this particular statue. Now, as we move towards the other door in the museum, we're going to enter out into part of the area which I referred to as a study room, which is now a chapel for the priests. As the Archdiocese has a regulation that every rectory must have a small chapel for the use of the priests in the priest living quarters. And since this room was not able to be used in the way that we intended it to at the present time, Father Donald and Father Bob decided that it could become a very good small chapel for the use of the priests. So when we go out this door, we will be entering directly into that room. Remember that it was intended to be a small study room. And also, as we enter this area and move about, we're going to see some of the very, very old parts of this second floor of Mission Santa Inés, the center adobe walls, the area where the church and the convento come together. They are all in their original state. So now we're going to go out this door and we're going to enter into the area outside the mission archive. Here we are in the actually the chapel for the priests' private use. As I said before, it was to be originally a study area, and perhaps at a future date when it becomes necessary, but it has been turned into quite a very attractive little sanctuary. The priests gather here for the recitation of the divine office. It is close to their living quarters, and they can come and say their prayers, and they can have their communal prayer life here in this particular chapel without going downstairs into the church or into the Blessed Sacrament Chapel. We will take a look at the Blessed Sacrament Chapel a little bit later in this tour. At the present time, we're going to go out of this chapel and into the area directly outside the archives. I might note that now that we have finished our tour of the archives, that a conditioning system for the air has been installed that controls the air and the heat and the temperature in the room of the archives to such a degree that it is conducive to the preservation of historical items. We are now in the area that is directly outside the sanctuary and the archives, and we are now getting our first opportunity to view some of the original structure of the mission, primarily the center bearing wall, which is in fairly good shape after many, many years of standing. In fact, the walls that we will be looking at date back to 1804, at least in the construction period, so that the mission was most likely complete about 1808, the building of the mission convento and the first church. But looking up at the walls, we can see the layering of the original adobe block. To some degree in there, we can see the blocks, we can see the mud that was used as a as a mortar to hold the bricks together. We can also see samples of the original limestone plaster over this particular doorway. At a later date, we will go through, in a few moments rather, we will go through this doorway and get another chance to see some very rustic construction of the mission, which will cover an area that is partially decayed and partially still intact as part of the original construction of the mission. But as I move this way, I want you to notice, as we did at this particular point, also this archway and doorway. This is a wonderful example of the use of the arch tiles here at the mission. These tiles, although they appear much to be like the tiles we see on the floor, are primarily different, primarily in a way that looking up in a reference book, you will see that the arch tiles are generally of a different shape. They are very thick at one end and thin at the other, so that they can be laid in like in this particular fashion, and there will not be any large gaps between the tiles. So we can see at this particular area, the mortar is quite even because the tiles themselves are somewhat tapered. And they also form a structural area which makes the doorway very strong. One of the very weak parts of all the missions has been the doorways. Because of the adobe construction of the building, the adobe does crack, the adobe dries, seismic pressures are put upon these adobe walls, and in the downstairs floor, quite often it was necessary to block up the windows and to open up new areas because of the weakness of the walls in the area of a window or a door, and consequently that door was blocked up structurally by the Padres and structurally reconstructed, and a new doorway or a new window was made available for a particular room. However, this area that we're in now is original doorway into the choir loft from the second floor. It is from this, through this archway that the students who were studying in the seminary, the first seminary here in California, they entered from the outside through a stairway and approached the choir loft, and it was in the choir loft that they attended Mass and they recited the Divine Office. And so for briefly now, we have been in the choir loft before, but I'm going to open up the door so we can get a connection between the church and the choir loft and the area in which we are. Earlier, we discussed the heating system in the church. The area that we are standing now, which is directly to the right of the entrance to the choir loft, is the area where the furnaces and the pumps that pump the hot water into the heating system, the radiant heating system in the church. At this particular point, we see a pump which circulates the water, which is sealed in the system, distilled water. And here are two furnaces. One furnace operates the nave of the church. The other furnace, which is of the same size, operates the sanctuary and the sacristy. If we will look up to the ceiling above along by the vents here, we will see the side wall of the 1817 church. We're going to see a better picture of this at a later date, but we can see the tar paper that was placed on the roof early on after the destruction of the second floor at the church, and you can see the direction of the slant that was built here as covering over covering over the original second floor of the mission, and this tar paper was used as an area to seal the leakage from the outside as the water ran down the roof. You can also see that the original limestone plaster of this area is intact here, and although it's been patched slightly at the weak points, it also can be noticed that Somewhere after the earthquake of 1812, when the new church was built, it was found necessary that the top part of this wall would not be adobe, but it would be of a brick construction. And it's quite interesting to note there are all different sizes of bricks in this area. Some are the thin bricks, others are the very thick bricks, but they were all used and they formed, as it were, a cap on the new church, and they run straight on through. We go into the other room, we will also see. And also we will note that in 1947, when the work was done under the guidance of the House Foundation, that the roof was taken off of the church at that particular time, and was found that these blocks formed the top part of the wall construction. And at that particular time, another 2 feet of concrete was added to the walls of the church, with steel rods going down deeply into the adobe walls through the brick walls, and thereby protecting the walls of the church, strengthening them, and also giving them a better footing in order to put the new roof on the church, which was put in 1940 during the work of 1974. So we can see actually here, as far as the heating system is concerned, there are 2 sources of heat, one from this furnace and one from the other furnace. The water goes in through the walls here, and these are 1-inch lines, copper lines, and go down into the through the walls into the floor below the choir loft, and are circulate back and forth on the floors of the church. Before we go into the other room, we're going to draw attention just here to directly in front of me, where we can see some of the historical remains of where the original convento was, and the part that was was not destroyed by the earthquake of 1812. We can also see the connection where the new church was built up alongside the old convento buildings, and that area appears to be approximately right in this area here, and there is a separation going on through, and so that these walls over on this side here were part of the structure that withstood the earthquakes of 1812, although much of the other side of it collapsed. But it was over this area that the second roof was put on the church, eliminating the second floor. I am now passing through the center bearing wall and the doorway that we spoke of before. We're going to stop for a moment and take a look at this door, because it is different from the other doorways here at the mission. It is interesting to note that the part that forms the arch is not, there is no tile construction, no type of tiles there that protect the arch. This particular arch has been a source of trouble for many, many years, and no matter how many times we patch it, there are weaknesses. At the present time, the patch that I see along here has again cracked because of the seismic, mostly of the seismic activity of the ground here in the mission. The archway was cut out of the adobe wall at this particular point, and we guess or estimate that probably this wall was cut through here at the time the seminary was built, so that the students from the seminary would have access to the choir loft. We've already spoke about the seminarians' use of the choir. So this particular arch, its purpose was to gain access to the other side of the building, and through that access to the church. Just briefly, for a moment, turning to the left, you're going to see some electronic equipment here, and I'll briefly describe what that is. In this particular cabinet are the tapes and the amplifiers for the various rooms, the tours that are activated in the museum itself. The tapes that contain the explanations of those rooms are contained in this cabinet here. Here below that is a small television set. It is really nothing more than a monitor, and it has been placed there with a constant surveillance of the church and the artwork. We have had a number of attempts to steal things from the church, and as a result now we do have a camera that focuses on all the central parts of the mission church. And although we don't monitor it constantly, if there is something missing from the church, we will be able to track down and find out who the culprit was. Now, getting to a more interesting part of the this mission structure, we're going to look at this particular time to the very interesting adobe structure to the left of the camera. As we look at this wall, we're going to see the vast thickness of the wall. It is a result of two walls, actually. We are seeing the wall, at the particular time, we are seeing the wall which formed the original wall of the convento, the wall of the church, of the first church, being beyond that. And again, we are going to see that the same use of brick was used to cap the old walls on the new church at the top with block and tile in order to strengthen and preserve them. We can also see the line of the roof that was put on the convento after the earthquake of 1812. We see the perfect outline of the tapered roof from the center to the outside. Coming down and looking down into this area here, there is a possible explanation for this that Mike Loehr seems to feel that this was a doorway that entered into the church, and it could very well be, although it's difficult to say because of the way it is cut out at the beginning. However, it had a specific purpose because it is very smooth and it is not rough like the rest of the buildings. So it most likely was a doorway, a part of a doorway that entered into the first church. There are many things we do not know about the first church. We do not know how big of a church it was, how much it looked like the church that we have nowadays, how big it actually was in the beginning. And perhaps we'll never know the original dimensions of the original church because the Padres did not always send correct reports to Mexico City when they were building these missions. They made annual reports, but quite often the annual reports were somewhat deceptive. For example, the design for the missions called for 2-foot walls, adobe walls in the construction. Well, the Padres soon found out that 2 feet was not enough to really be structurally sound in the dampness and the earthquake country that we lived in. And as a result, they increased the size of the walls at least by 1 foot, and in some cases by 2 feet. But this was never recorded in the annual report to Mexico City, to the head of the missionaries in California. We're going to see some of the structure of the original bearing wall. The first thing to notice, and we'll see a number of these as we go down through here, is the little cutouts at the top of the wall. They're not actually little, but what we have to note here, first of all, is the fact that the mission that we looked at today, in appearance from the outside, is not historically correct. I had a long discussion with this with Cardinal Manning at one time, and he had done some research on it as a hobby, and we both came to the same agreement, and I'm sure any archaeological studies will come to the same agreement, that there was no balance. One more thing before we leave this area and move into a little bit more interesting area and more intact area of the adobe section of the building. Again, I want to draw your attention to this line which goes down here, which was where the second roof of the church was placed after the earthquake of 1812, covering over the second floor. In 1870, when Father Lynch was the pastor of this parish, there was, of course, no living quarters here on the second floor. His bedroom and little office was directly below here in what was now the Madonna Chapel. Well, during some very strong rainstorms in April of about 1871 or 1872, a great leak appeared between the two buildings here. So where the church came together with the lowered roof of the convento, the area sprang a large amount of water began to come through that leak, and it flowed down through here, through the adobe, and down onto the first floor. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, Father Lynch woke up and he found himself totally surrounded in a swamp of wet mud, and he had to vacate the room, of course, under emergency conditions. After that event, Father Lynch decided that he wasn't going to live here at the mission anymore, so he packed up his bags and moved out to the college school, which is located on the Davidge property at the present time, which was a school for boys run by the Christian Brothers. He moved and lived out there for about a year, at which time when the bishop discovered that he was not, Bishop Amat discovered that he was not living at the mission where he was assigned, wrote a letter ordering Father Lynch to move back to the mission and to fix himself up some proper quarters so that he would be able to maintain a presence and administer the spiritual needs of this particular parish. And Father Lynch promptly returned here to the mission to do his pastoral duties. But it is an example of the rustic way of life that the padres that served between the priests, that served between the period of the abandonment of the mission by the Franciscans and the period when the Capuchins came here in 1924. Those were very extremely hard days. It was a very rugged life, and the priests that served here from the time the padres left, Father Basso, Father Forelli, Father Lynch, Father O'Connell, and Father Buckler, and some of the other priests whose names I do not recall at the present time. They lived under very rusty conditions here in among these adobe walls, all of which were collapsing. Every one of them did an outstanding job to preserve, to the much of their ability, the buildings that were remained. And it will be a tribute to every one of them for the part that they played, because the mission we have today would not be standing were these priests not diligent in trying to preserve and to keep the mission structure. Going back to the archway that we have passed through a little while ago, and which we already spoke, we're now going to go down along the west side of the mission upper story convento and look at some of the original wall as it appears from the other side. This wall is in particularly great shape, and for one reason or another it has not been subject to too much decay. But some of the noteworthy things in this section of the building is we are able to see the original limestone plaster, and in a much larger area than we have been able to find anywhere else in the mission. So it can give us a much better picture of what the buildings looked like both inside and outside in the days of the mission period. Also of note here are two very well preserved areas which show the rooms or the walls that protruded from the center bearing wall going out this way. And you can also see the inset for the adobes that connected to the wall that went in this direction. And as a result, there was created not only the room on this side here, but as I walk down along this area here, we will come to even a better preserved extension or room divider here in this particular section. We have in part of our efforts to preserve the walls here that are in such good shape, this metal railing has been put up so that there is no chance that moving through here with equipment or anything else, damage could be done to the walls. A few things have been done here which I believe are in violation of the preservation of these walls. For example, here in this cooling system that goes through here, electrical system maybe, this box was permanently affixed to the wall. That is not a necessary way to go, and it is also, each time you do penetrate these walls, you create weak spots from which some deterioration can take place. As you can see in these other areas, we have done everything and kept it away from the original building so that the walls that we do have here are in a state of preservation. To my right is a wall, which is a modern wall, which was intended at an early period to create a room which would be an upstairs dining room for the Padres. At that time, Father Donald decided that it was not necessary to have the dining room and kitchens moved upstairs, and this room was left unfinished. However, at about 1998 or 1999, this room was finished, and it now serves as a kind of recreation or athletic room for the priests. It also served as an office temporarily for the youth minister here at the mission. The two chairs that we're looking at present time are not of any historical value, but I thought we might include them in this tour because their origin needs to be determined in one way or another. They most likely were donated to the mission during the time of Father Tim. And if you will recall, when we were in the dining room below, there was one large table, and at that large table there were these two chairs, one at each end. And they served as dining room chairs in the dining room almost up to 1978. The earliest use of them I recall is around 1950 here in the dining room at the church. Most likely they were donated by some family here in the parish. Now, as we conclude this description of the upstairs section of the mission, we are back almost to where we began this upstairs tour. We're going to go back down and go over to the conference room and the parish hall, get a look at that area and what was done there during the rebuilding period in 1988. At the present time, we are standing in the hallway that connected the back convento arches with the front convento arches. It was established in 1947 when the seminary was created here for Capuchin students. The seminary did not last too many years, but they did have up to 5 and 6 novices here in preparation to study for the priesthood. Father Cyril was the first rector of the seminary, and he saw it through to the very end. This end of the building is actually a part of the building that has been reconstructed. The back half of the mission on the garden side, about 4 of the arches and the balcony and roof had collapsed, and up till about 1945 there just was a huge pile of ruins in this area. However, at the time the seminary was to be established here at the mission, this end of the building was rebuilt, and this area was used as a back and a front entrance to the monastery and to the seminary. As we go by this particular door, this door opened into the seminary kitchen, which was used. There was a stove and sinks, etc. in here, and it was here that the 5 and 6 seminarians ate their meals. On the other side of this room, which is we cannot see from here, is the Blessed Sacrament Chapel. And as you will recall, when we did the Blessed Sacrament Chapel, we spoke about it being the dormitory for the students that were assigned here at the seminary. Also, walking down this corridor, and we go past the door, which is here on my right, and this door was used and contained the showers and toilets for the use of the seminarians. Across the way is a door which opens onto a stairway which leads upstairs to the monastery. This area was available only to the priests here at the mission because the students were not actually allowed in the cloister under the old rules until after they had been fully professed. Walking further down the corridor, we come to the center bearing wall of the mission. It is approximately 6 foot thick. And the entranceway that you see here is actually a brand new entranceway. I'm not sure whether it was replaced an old entranceway because this part of the building was totally in ruins, but it was created so that there would be access to the front convento of the mission. The door you see at the end is a door which enters now into the gift shop. Originally that door was not there. This hallway continued straight on to the front convento of the mission. When I opened the door here, you're going to see the gift shop, but actually that was a closed corridor, and in 1985 the gift shop was enlarged, and the wall was taken down and enlarged the gift shop, and the entrance from the outside in front was cut off. So I'll now open this door and you can take a look and just imagine that this hallway continued straight on to the front of the building. At this other end of the hallway, you will notice a door which is also an access to another toilet, which was used during the seminary days here at the Old Mission. The origin of this door, there was another door exactly like it on the shower part of the for the students. The origin of this door, we don't have any particular knowledge of its where it came from. I do know that this was a frosted glass window in here, which created a light in the bathroom. The number on here is hard to determine where or the origin of this door, unless perhaps it came from another building, which perhaps a hotel or some other building that would have had numbered doors, and the number was not removed. Basically, beyond that, there's no particular knowledge of this particular door. It does not date to the mission period, but it could possibly date before the time of the reconstruction here at Mission Santa Inés. At the present time, we are looking at a portion of the administration part of the mission here. The hallway you are looking at the present time did not exist before 1985. Actually, there was a doorway in from the gift shop into this area. The area from the center bearing wall extends completely to the front of the convento. The room, there was one room, and I'll walk down as far as the size of that room is concerned. One room extended along this wall all the way down to this column here. And that was one large room. It was established by Father Tim. It was one of the mission salas. Father Tim created that for his office. And a very wealthy man from Rancho San Fernando Rey donated the bookcases and desks, so that it was quite a very nice office, and Father Tim used it quite a bit. But as we walk down this hallway, we're looking here at the center bearing wall. These walls were established in 1985 to create a connection between one end of the building and the other. Originally, if you wanted to go further on down this, you had to go through the pastor's room to get to the secretary's room, and from the secretary's room to get to the outside. But with the new construction under the at the time when the hall was being built, that was all changed. But a particular note is the arch in the doorway, which we're now going to take a quick look at. At this point, you're now looking at one of the original arches that connected the front section of the convento through the center bearing wall into the back section of the mission. Believe it or not, this area is and was the mission archive. In this room now, which is nothing more than a broom closet, there were the files. And if you'll notice that the door that's on here is a steel door, and all the mission records that needed to be preserved for future use and historical items were maintained and kept in this closet. It is not very large, but Father Tim had done a great job of putting a filing system in there, which kept all the documents that needed to be preserved in this particular room. He had the door lined with tin, heavy gauge tin, to make it fireproof, and it served as the archives until we built the archival system upstairs. We are presently looking at what was the doorway to the large office that Father Tim had established in this area. The doorway this is probably an original doorway. It has all the original adobe. It has the arch blocks above it, and there was quite a large door here that one could come through from the entrance hall that we spoke about before and into this room. This room would have been approximately 3 times the size of its present size. The wall that we're looking at here right now was blocked up in 1985, and for many years remained just a blocked up arch. However, when Father Miguel Ortiz was stationed here, he decided that it should become a little bit more attractive, and consequently he had it decorated and painted, and now it is a little shrine to Our Lady of Guadalupe, plus other items that one wants to use it for. Ready? We are presently in the gift shop, but we are looking at the other side of the doorway that we have just talked about in the office across the way. As you can see, the door had been blocked up, but the doorway did originally go through here, and one entered into the large office space on the other side of here. It's now blocked up. This is used as a part of the gift shop at the present time. This second doorway is now also part of that very large room that we talked about. We haven't got any access to it right now, but it is a small room, and it is used by Sister Elizabeth for the RCIA program. After leaving this room, there was another doorway that cut through from that room into this room here. It has also been blocked up. We will not be able to see that today either, but it was blocked up. But the pastor's room, therefore, extended down to this area here. This buttress was built as support of the building during the 1985 reconstruction, and also the beams going across the ceiling. Above the ceiling, here where there's the acoustical tile, are the original mission beams. The 12 by 16 beams are still in place. They run across from the center wall, and that's this wall here. They run across, completely across to the front convento, and above them is the priest's living room, which is floating on top of those beams. The next room we see here was the room that was originally the office of the parish secretary. The safe, the desks, all the phones were answered from this area. And in the reconstruction of 1985, when the additions to the building were made, this room now became the pastor's office and room. If we could get inside, you will also see the doorway that passed through from this room to the gift shop. But at this point in time, you can see there was a slight rise in the floor, and it was at this particular point, approximately right in here, that the new building was constructed over the ruins of the old mission buildings. And as we spoke of before in the hall, the necessary to cover over the ruins and preserve them for future use, it was necessary to put some fill over the ground, and consequently, in order to taper from the old building into the new building, it was necessary to have a rise in the flooring here, so that the ruins below were protected. quite interesting to note that just about in this area, when this wall was being replastered, was the mission fireplace. Probably this was one of the rooms where the padres gathered or people gathered, but on the old walls, the block walls that are in behind, are the remains of a fireplace and a part of a chimney that went upstairs. But we do not know when that was discontinued, although Father Buckler and Mamie Delay do speak about sitting around a fireplace. The only fireplace that so far has been discovered within the building was in this area. As I go past this area and beyond this arch, everything that is from here and out this way, including the parish hall, is all new construction. Okay, now the area that I'm standing now is where we discovered the remains of an original fireplace. I'm not exactly sure because it's been covered up, but it has been recorded in the archaeological studies that were made for building this building, the exact location. But approximately here there was a low area, and it was obvious that it at one time had been a fireplace. Okay, we are now in the last section of the original buildings before the restoration of 1985. As we've been speaking, as we went along through here, we spoke of the various doorways that existed connecting the far end of the convento with the this end of the convento. This is another remnant of the doorway that led through Father Tim's office and into this room. All through the times of Father Cyprian, 1947, Father Kelly, Father Tim, all the way down to the time when Father Jim Cleary came and we had the restoration of the hall, etc. This room was the secretary, the parish secretary's office. And as a result, this was the door that was mostly used when people came to visit. They would come in here, ask to see the priest, and if Father's offices would be in here. And if he was here, then they would be introduced into his room for whatever reasons that they were here. Mostly at that time there was a desk right in here which faced this way here, and the parish secretary remained here. Approximately in this area here was a very large window which was put in at the 1947 reconstruction of the mission. The area that is just beyond where I'm looking now was outside. The driveway actually went just right outside this wall on the outside, but there was a big double window. It was a hand-cranked window. It had no historical value. It was a window that was put in order to give some light into this particular room for the secretary. That area, when the new buildings were built, was blocked up with red brick, and there's no more remnants of that particular window that was there. Over in this niche here, you might notice it appears to be what could be in former times a window. It could have been a small shrine. I recall it as a small shrine in which the parish secretary kept the statue of the Blessed Mother or the Sacred Heart. It is awfully square, and as a result, it looks to be a more modern time. Although in behind it, I cannot exactly recall. It seems like behind the wood frame here that there is an arch. There could have been a very gradual sloped arch. I do not recall, but it did not. It was not a window that exited to the outside. And also in this, the secretary's desk was here. There was a very large safe located here, and it was in that safe, which is now in the accountant's office, that the financial records, etc., were kept. Okay, as we leave the old administrative office, the parish secretary's office, we enter into the new administrative office. This part of the building was part of the brand new construction, which took place in the mid-'80s, and is now used as the reception room and for various other activities, business activities here at the mission. Right directly above us on the second floor, which was added at that time, is one more living quarters for the priests. If you will recall, when we were on the second floor, you will have seen that particular room, and it is directly above this room here. As we look around this room, we come over to the desk of the present parish administrator, and Sheila Benedict. Sheila Benedict is now an administrator here at the mission, but she is also responsible and truly the founder of the mission archive system that we've taken a look at above. So she's fulfilling a twofold activity here at the mission.